Hello and welcome back to another feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I'm coming from Las Vegas, Nevada, and behind me you can probably see the amazing casino, the Venetian. And the Venetian, I think, is one of the more amazing casinos on the Strip. And just from a fact standpoint, as I get out my cheat sheet here, the Venetian was built in 1997 and features 4,049 hotel rooms. It's owned by the Sands Corporation and in fact features 120,000 square feet of space. So as a casino, there are two things going on here, I think. Never count on a quiet filming opportunity on the Strip. So as a casino, there are two things going on here. One is the sheer scale and size, and as we'll talk about later with the Palazzo, which is the sister casino, the addition a few years back to the Venetian, even larger and actually larger than the Pentagon in terms of its total usable space. But the Venetian really teaches us when it was built that you can do two things. You can create a casino on a grand scale, much like the MGM, of course, with a similar size in terms of the rooms in the casino, but you can also develop remarkable theming. And what I want to do now is take you inside some of the spaces of what I think is one of the best themed casinos, where I've noted the most guests having that kind of awe-inspiring experience as they go inside the casino and see some of the charm of the Venetian. So let's step inside and look at some of the sights and sound of this very authentic Venetian theming here at the Venetian, Las Vegas. So as we continue our tour here of the Venetian, you can see here it's nighttime and there isn't maybe as much happening during the day. Unfortunately, the outside gondoliers, I will check inside for you, but the outside gondolas are empty, so we do not have that aspect of the theming, but they're still present. We can still see them, and really this is, I think, kind of an amazing point here that maybe we wouldn't consider. It's relatively open space, so you can see here that we do have some sense of theming going on here in terms of the architectural features. In the back here we have the entrance to a nightclub, and here we have the gondola areas and the bridge and so forth. But what's interesting about this overall space is the fact that it is open. It's a place where people can gather. It's a place where they're not necessarily making a lot of money with slot machines or entertainment. So it's a space that's provided here for the guest, but not necessarily one that is bringing in a lot of income. But it's an important lesson, I believe, in that we shouldn't forget the fact that people do deserve open spaces and spaces that they can enjoy, because sometimes it appears to me at some casinos that they're trying very simply to take as much money as possible and not think about the more aesthetic enjoyments of the guest. And here on the exterior of the Venetian, we could see attention to just a panoramic scale of architecture and recreation of authenticity and a sense of the vibrance and architectural majesty. And here in an exterior space, you can see we have signage that attempts to create the historic legacy, the vintage legacies of Venice and of Italy. And here we see the use of a mural to create a trompe l'oeil effect of depth here in the area outside the Venetian, near the where the gondoliers roam and entertain guests. So we're back here sort of at the, I guess, mezzanine right before we enter the Grand Canal shops at the Venetian. And one of the things you can see is that people are alongside here taking photos. What they've done effectively is they've created vistas. I talk about vistas at points in the Immersive Worlds Handbook. And you can see here that I can just pan here, walk along this mezzanine area, and really see incredible views of the Strip and also incredible views of the theming. I think what the Venetian has done so effectively is they've spread the theming out, they've established continuity, much like Caesars, but Caesars does this more in the interior space, but in the exterior, the Venetian is incredibly effective in terms of creating almost thematic vistas where any guest can move from one space to the next and really see the dramatic architecture, the theming, and the nuance and so forth. And it really goes, I think, a long way in terms of establishing credibility with the guests. So let's go inside the Grand Canal shops and take a look at some of the theming there. So we are now going inside the Grand Canal shops, and voila, the minute we enter, we see these dramatic murals and representations. And please excuse my lack of knowledge of Italian, Venetian culture and history and so forth, but what I can say is, as a guest, and in many ways, when I look at a lot of these spaces, I appreciate it probably as the guest does, because I don't claim to be an expert on a lot of the periods represented in the casinos, but I can appreciate it from the guest perspective and see that they've done quite a remarkable job in terms of the theming and establishing, I think, from the minute you enter, a panoramic space, a space in which you can see art everywhere. And at the same time, you also see integration. You see integration of the space with brands that have nothing to do with a theme. And that's one key, I believe, with theming today, is that you cannot rely upon outside brands, outside vendors, major companies having any relationship to your brand. So you have to provide a space that's open enough, that's thematic, but open enough such that they can enter the space and sell their products, and the two of you can essentially coexist effectively. Let's take a look at a few more of the spaces then. So here's another area near the Grand Canal shops, and you can see here use of murals is another way to achieve some degree of theming, and it's something fairly simple you can do, but I think effective in terms of creating an immersive space for the guest. Well, indeed, many of the shops are closing, but we still see the charm here of Venice that's been created. Opportunities right here for photos, for guests to take photos, and as you walk through here, you really do get a good perspective, I think, of how this feels much like a miniature city. Sidewalk perspective, and in some ways, as I'm looking at it right now through the viewfinder, it's even more impressive, I think. You can see they've done also the faux ceilings here, much like the Forum shops at Caesars, and they've really established, I think, a rather unique passageway that guests move through, and it really does give them that sense of charm. We're coming up here on the gondolas, and hordes of tourists are taking photos, which is great. We want tourists to take photos because, of course, there are sights to be seen, even though these are reconstructed spaces of other themes. And I think it's pretty amazing. I've always just been sort of awe-inspired by the gondolas here at the Venetian. Again, academics might say this is phoniness, this isn't real Venice and so forth, but as we learn studying themes, as we learn studying cultures, there really isn't one authentic culture out there. Even going to Venice, you would be confronted with simulations and reconstructions, and so we really shouldn't be negative about this. We should instead appreciate it and see that it is a simulation. They never purport to be, quote, the real thing, and that's really missing the point. So what we should do as guests is appreciate the space and appreciate the fact that as these many tourists are standing around the outside here, it's very real to them. It's very meaningful to them as an immersive space. So we'll take a look at a few more spaces here inside the Grand Canal shops inside the Venetian. So one of the things I like here is that they've established sort of different levels here, and they have these bridges that lead across the canal. And of course, you know, there's nothing terribly functional about the bridge. You know, you don't need that particular bridge for people to go across. But what is key, I think, about it is the fact that it gives that guest a sense of a threshold of a space you're passing through or above. And as I walk over it, you know, I'm going into another section of the shops and eventually the casino. And for me, that's an important side of this, is that sense of establishing with the guest connections from one space to the next. And we're coming up upon here I think one of the more dramatic spaces for me inside the Grand Canal Shops. And if you look, let's just actually step back here. If you look at this, so we're using perspective and space. We're going from this, rather narrow space and low ceilings to a grand plaza. Quite dramatic. We see here, and you can't, I wish I could capture this with a wide angle lens and you could see the true expansiveness of this, but it's quite astounding. I mean, it's astounding to think that we can do this inside casinos, use theming in such a way that guests upon guest, they're snapping pictures away, they're taking remembrances of their trip to the Venetian and using them for important points of memory in their lives. And for me, a space like this also is effective because of the use of lighting. You can see once you walk in here, the music doesn't perhaps fit the occasion, but the lighting certainly does. They have some holiday displays here in time for Christmas and so forth, and you can see that the lighting itself, in addition to the openness of the plaza space and also the height of the ceilings, creates that sense of ambiance that really puts the guest in the sense that they have entered into another sort of space. So very dramatic, certainly inside the Grand Canal Shops here, as we look at more theming in the Venetian. So here, as we round out our tour of the theming at the Venetian, we're walking up to the lobby area, and for me this was always one of the more dramatic areas in terms of the reconstructions of authentic, historic Italian murals, and you can see here on the ceiling. Just really, I think, a dramatic space, and one through all the uses of the tiles here on the floor, to the ceiling, to the columns, really reminds us that we're in a space that's remarkably different than our everyday lives and the spaces that we do encounter in our everyday lives. And as you approach the lobby area, the front desk, the check-in area, you can see again, really quite dramatic in terms of the recreations, space, use of lighting, and so forth. So our tour of the Venetian, I think, has reminded us that you can effectively use theming today. You can maintain that theming so long as you attend to the needs of the guests, develop dramatic vistas in the space, use incredible architecture, detail, and of course have, in the case of the Venetian and the Palazzo, a couple $1 billion to spend in order to achieve this. But anything's possible if you have the dedication, the mind behind it, and certainly the money and the capital. So hope you'll have an opportunity to come back and hear additional features of the Immersive Worlds Handbook.